and I'm here today to talk to you about music and Ruby, which might seem like a strange combination, but we're going to find out how they work together. So what I like to do is so I like things and I like coding, and I think like writing code is a very good way to understand the world. So you can sort of like figure out how things work by just like making it in code, because you don't have a choice. You have to actually understand it to be able to write code about it. So that's what I did with this music stuff, and like today I'm here to show you like the end result of my process. So we're going to do a quick history lesson about recorded music, like how it all started and how we ended up with the digital audio world we have now, and then we're going to see how we can make some sounds and change some sounds using Ruby code. So let's get started with that. So what's music actually? So music is, in the end, it's a waveform that our brain kind of models into something. So, well, waveform is like, you might see waveforms like in some of your code, like if you're doing some long visualizations, it's, you can sometimes run across this. But it's like if you want to visualize that, it's kind of like waves in a pool. So like audio waves are kind of air molecules bouncing against each other and are kind of like creating these waves that just crash into each other. And that goes from a sound source to your ear. So like there's a little speaker here. I'm actually not sure if I'm on it, but like if I'm speaking now, like all these air molecules are kind of bouncing against each other. Then they end up in your ear. And there are these little tiny hairs called follicles in your ear that vibrate. And these create a little tiny amount of electricity. And then your brain somehow makes sense of this all. So there's just some basically almost random vibrations, and then suddenly your brain finds a way to perceive that as either language or music. So yeah, how does that work? So in the case of, well, language is a whole different subject, but in the case of music, it's there are three things that are sort of the core of this. So the first thing is pitch, and pitch is how often a waveform oscillates, like how often it kind of like how fast it is within a given amount of time. So if you take a very basic pitch waveform, you hear something like this. Yeah. Okay, we got sound. So this is a pitch. It's a very boring one. It doesn't tell us much. But it's a pitch, and if you kind of change the number of times a waveform oscillates around, you get a little row of notes like this. So this already sounds a little bit more like music. So this is like the do, re, mi, fa, sol you probably got in primary school. And so that's basically pitch. All this music stuff, I think the funny thing about it is that in the end it's relatively simple. Only musicians have found a lot of ways to make it sound very complicated, but in the end it's relatively simple. So the second thing is timbre, and timbre is how these little like kind of variations in the waveform influence how we what something sounds like. So if you take the same scale I just played and listen to this one. So this is a piano. So that's timbre is the difference between something like really bland and like actually listening to a specific instrument. And the final thing is tempo. So our brain is very sensitive to tempo. So anytime there's like a sound and there's a pause and there's a sound again, and that kind of sounds like and it kind of sounds like there's a sort of rhythm to it, we immediately think there's a rhythm. So it's like a simple drum thing like this. It's like immediately perceived as being rhythmic by our brain. Yeah. So if you combine these two things, you can you end up with oh, I went wrong. Anyway, back in the day, so like you had to go to a place to listen to recorded music. So or to listen to music, there was no recording. And you actually had to listen to people like playing the thing in the room. So, and then came recorded music, and I'll quickly go over that because it's kind of like a tech scene in itself. So it all started with this guy. like Thomas Edison. He invented the light bulb and also the first recording device. So that looked like this. So this sort of scratched like little patterns onto tin foil in a cylinder, and it sounded absolutely horrible. So this is what it started out with. So like nobody cared about this because like as with all technology, like in the beginning it's really crappy and nobody can imagine that it's going to be amazing pretty soon. So and then somebody else came up with a gramophone, and this one has a disc, and that's actually because Edison had a patent on the cylinder, so they had to do a disc just to get around the patent. So yeah, really nothing is new. You know, all this stuff that we see now happened back in the day as well. So this already started to sound like a little bit better. Yeah, still not really amazing. And they had to do like these really complicated recording sessions where all the musicians had to sit very close to this tube thing, otherwise like the volume would be too low. So then we got tape machines, and that started to sound pretty good. So then you got like a sound like this. And then the Second World War happened, and like a lot of stuff was invented. So like radar, for example, and a lot of the technology in radar actually turned out to be very useful to make recording sound good. So we got these tubes, you know, you got like stuff like this, which already sounds. This is basically just as good what we have nowadays. Like actually, a lot of people are like going back to these old techniques. Then we got transistors, and you know, all this stuff got a little bit cheaper, and then we got the 80s. So there was also French music made in the 80s. So and then we are finally at digital audio. So these compact discs had like these little dents in the plastic, and there would be like a sort of like a mirror behind them, and there's a laser that can read the dents. And and now we're like finally in the ones and zeros era. So what is this digital audio thing? So digital audio is sampling a waveform so often that as humans we can't really hear the difference if you go back and rebuild the waveform from the samples. So the samples are actually not as smooth as the waveform is, but if you just do it often enough, then it's going to trick our brain. And that eventually led to like software like this that I like to use, which basically has all this stuff that I just showed you is just integrated into these tools, and people just use that to make music just on a single laptop. So we're going to look at now we're going to use Ruby to replicate some of the parts of this piece of software and kind of see how it works. So to do that, we're going to need some gems. Oh, thank you, Siri. So the first gem we're going to use is the wave file gem. So this is a gem that can read and write audio data to the wave format. So wave format is the simplest audio format that exists. It's basically just ones and zeros. Like every sample is either is a number. So we need a little utility method this is not super important to completely understand. So we're just reading this wave format, which is a little more convoluted, and just making a whole big array of numbers. And then you end up with this. And you know, it's kind of hard to make any sense of this as a human. So we're going to go to the next gem. And the next thing we're going to use is chunky PNG. And we're going to be making some images so we can get a sense of what this audio data is actually, what it actually means. So we're going to go from this to like something we can actually understand. And to do that, we're going to take this whole big array of samples, which all the samples are values like between minus 30,000 to plus 30,000. And we're going to draw a pixel onto a PNG image. And well, this is the code, and this is the result. You get a kind of like a scatter plot. So you see, like this is like some audio from reality, like something, I think some kind of voice or something. So like real audio from recorded in reality is pretty messy. But if you play one of those pure waves that I talked about earlier and visualize that, you see that you get a super clear, like recognizable pattern. So this is like really every sample is a single dot. which is a little hard to follow if you've got like bigger audio files. So we also need something to kind of aggregate those samples. And this is a little bit more complicated code. What we're doing here is we're taking a bunch of samples and just like making one dot out of the whole group. And then we get an image like this. So if you've ever worked with audio software like this might look pretty familiar, because this is basically how all the visualizations work. So this is taking the audio, kind of like grouping the numbers and drawing the averages of that. Yeah, so I think now we've covered our basis. We can sort of go to actually doing something with the sound with the Ruby code. So the first thing we're going to do is amplification. So in the analog world, you would need like a tube or a transistor circuit to just make add more electricity to that same signal. But in our world, we can just do it with some numbers. So if we take this, so we take this sample, and we want to make it louder. So at the moment, like the peaks are relatively, like they're close to the middle. So if we want to make it louder, we'll end up with like, well, higher peaks basically. So that sounds like this. Oh, the speaker is already distorting a little bit. So how do we do that with Ruby code? Well, we just multiply it with something. So we take the numbers and we take a ratio of 2.0 and we just make every single sample twice as loud. And well, then you've got amplification. And I think that's sort of the funny thing about this, that all the stuff you actually do with audio it's really almost nothing, but it does work. So what can happen is that we amplify something too loud. And let me turn it down a little bit. And then you get this. So we're amplifying by 4.0 here, and then we're actually going above the range of that's available for our samples, and then like we're cutting off parts of the signal, and you get this really ugly distortion, and that's called clipping in the audio world. So everybody hates clipping, and especially him. And you can see here what happens. So like some of these peaks are like really being cut off, so they're like all at the same point there. And that leads to this distortion that we just heard. Yeah, so this is the simplest thing you can do with audio. What's also cool to do is making some sounds. So that's what people use these kinds of synthesizers for, also in software nowadays. So one of the first things we're going to do is we're going to be making some noise. So, you know, this is noise. You can see it on your old TV if you still have one, if it doesn't get a signal. And we can make some, noise is basically randomness. So we can make noise just by using the Ruby random function. So we're adding a whole bunch of samples just by calling random between in a range. And if we add that to a sound source, we're going to get, well, this result. So this is as random as you're going to get it using a computer. And that sounds like this. So this is real random sound generated by the Ruby random function. And you might ask yourself, like, why would you need this? And it's actually used as a snare drum in electronic music a lot. So if you kind of like apply the rhythm thing just to the same noise sample, you kind of get a snare. So this is like you hear this in techno music a lot. So they will apply some processing and some other tricks to kind of make it fancy, but like underneath a lot of like the snare sounds you'll hear on the radio is basically just a noise generator. Yeah, another one that's highly popular is the square wave, and a square wave can be made using an oscillator. So this is a very basic oscillator written in Ruby. So we're using the enumerable module, and if we include that, you can actually define an each method, and you can just use that with all the standard loops and so on that are available in Ruby. So anytime we, pardon me, anytime each is called, we're going to generate a sample based on the position of the oscillator. It's either going to be like one way at the top end of the range or one way at the low end of the range. So we're going to be getting these lines that kind of like make up a square in the end. And then we can use the oscillator by creating it and defining a frequency for it. And then we can add this output into an array and write it to disk, and then we can listen to it again. So with an oscillator, with a square wave, the output looks like this. So, and it sounds like this. Horrible sound again, but like this, like all the music you'll hear on the radio nowadays actually has this in it as one of the building blocks. We'll get to that later. Yeah, so that's a square wave. Another one is a sine wave. So we've been looking at sine waves before. So sine waves are these waves that are they're also called pure waves. They can be made using pi. This is kind of a cool visualization where you can see how you can use a circle to draw a sine wave. And in Ruby, we can also do this. So we actually need like a bit of a math trick here where we're using the position and multiplying pi with that and then dividing it like to get back into the proper range. But using pi and just like some simple multiplications, we can actually draw this wave that we just saw. And that looks like this, and sounds like this. Yeah, this is just like the simplest sort of like base frequency you can do. And if you combine those, a couple of sine waves with different frequencies, so like we're taking we're creating 3 waves here, and we're mixing those together, and then you get like a chord. So that's already, that sounds a little bit like music. And if you make a chord, the whole waveform gets much more complex. And if you want to get into that, I would Google the Fourier transform, because there's a lot of like fun math things you can do with this that I'm not going to be talking about today. And that brings us to mixing. So what we just did is actually mixing multiple audio sources. So if we have a couple of different sources of audio, we can combine those into one. And they used to do that on these big mixing desks. So if we take like a sine wave and a drum thing and some other stuff, and we just like sum up all these numbers, then we can actually just listen to the combined sound. So first we're going to start by just reading these 3 wave files. So we've got a bass, a drum, and a piano. So we've got a bunch of audio files or like ranges of samples with the exact same length and the exact same start. And then we can simply loop through them and take like the same sample from every one of those waves and sum them up and put them in a new thing. And if you combine those 3 together, you end up with this pretty complicated waveform. And this piece of sound that was actually mixed in Ruby actually made in Ruby. Yeah. So I hope that you can sort of see that it doesn't necessarily have to be complicated. And the final thing I'm going to cover today is compression. So this is another thing you'll hear like in literally anything that's on the radio. So compression is a way of smoothing out peaks, removing peaks from a sound source, so you can make the whole thing louder. You kind of like put it in a smaller range. So this is an example of an old compressor that's amazing. So what happens with compression is that if you have a wave, for example this one, like the way to make it louder is actually identifying which of the points in that wave were louder than the rest and bringing that volume down. So you do that by deciding on a threshold, and everything above the threshold is going to be decreased in volume. And then you apply compression, so we just lower the peaks. And then as a final step, we can move the whole thing up. So then the whole thing gets louder because we were able to kind of like just make the peaks less loud. And believe it or not, we can also do this with Ruby. So if we take a sound source like this, so this is a cymbal. Yeah, and we can make it. We can make that cymbal hit. This is, by the way, the ugliest compressor you're ever going to hear in your life. It sounds absolutely terrible, I'm warning you, but it is a compressor. So what we're doing in Ruby is we're going through all the samples. We're identifying the samples that are above the threshold, and we're lowering them in volume. Then we get something that's lower in volume, and then we loop through the whole thing again and apply the makeup gain, as the audio engineers call it. So we're basically doing the amplification thing that I talked about in the beginning to get the whole thing like back up in level. And then we write that back to a WAV file. So then you get this. We go from the one we just heard to this one, where you can see like it kind of smoothed out the whole tail of the cymbal hit. It sounds horrible, I warn you. Here it is. Yeah, you can sort of hear this ringing thing, like as it kind of like makes all the less loud parts louder. And that brings me to the end of my talk. But like I see you guys are all a little bit skeptical. Like, is this already true? Like, can you make music using Ruby stuff? So, you know, I had to prove it to you. So I made a cover of the best, I think the best song ever. It's going to be released on Spotify next week.